the Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination, and at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita? Shariputra, O Shariputra, son or daughter of noble family, who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita, should see in this way, seeing the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, this emptiness also is form. Emptiness is no other than form. Form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics. There is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no ignorance, no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance, no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the three times by means of Prajnaparamita fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering should be known as truth, since there is no deception. Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way. Te ata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhisoha. Thus Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family. Thus it is, O son of noble family. Thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly and the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
Lala jupe ne cho tampa ne ngushe du chu nga yi du do jen rupa ho la ma yi bu jin zi ne su kan ro zo la sha tse lu Dajandara Samaraya Peyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisoha Papa Gonchu Sumji Gai Tempe Dorji Shiru Dorji Mepa Dorji Shewa Dorji Dragi Baji Metum Pechu Tanchi Shedin Goyi Soha Girin Tonya Jeju Shewa Dan Mitun Nube Jendan Rewa Dan Tumba Junjim Punsun Zod Yoji Raji De Jan De Na De Le
The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it.
May all sentient living beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. I send forth this jewel mandala to you, precious Guru. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamye Radayami. Chö dan zö di chö nam da zhang ju ba du da ni ya zu ji da gi chu nye ji pe zö nam ji ro la pe ji san ye ju ba ju chö dan zö di chö nam da zhang ju ba du da ni ya zu ji da gi chu nye ji pe zö nam ji Rola Benjie Sanye Jubarjo Che Dan Zji Jo Nan Da Janju Badu Da Ni Jazu Ji Da Gi Che Nye Ji Pe Se Nam Ji Rola Benjie Sanye Jubarjo
Namo laye gana lo danye yinge wadana me gana dan roa kunji dana jazan ba danye dage judun do waya ta
Tungshan triggered ba.
Mosha tine aji marbe.
Okay, yeah, we'll do. So does everybody have the text? Because I just looked around while we were doing prayers. I noticed that everyone doesn't have the text. Do we have more of those over there?
They were given out last time, and so now they're not left. So we have to get some more. We had a lot, and now they're taken.
The Beicham and Du. Gangen Sena the
Mommen digris ngaso lam sajila jo chula jo gendula jo what den digris dani teshi digris.
Okay, so it's not necessary for us to have books today because we can just give an entire teaching on I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, and I go for refuge to the Sangha, which the beginning of the text states, Lama, and it begins, I think it says, the Lama La Jasuchiya, the
Sanjila Chula
Ginula Jasuchiya. So the three jewels of refuge. Go for refuge to the three jewels.
Nyebu toji tonyo gane shadang shibi chuitiris, nyebu toji, tenji to, nyebu gundu shubi to, nyebu ladu bi to, nyebu sunji bi to, toji. Wati toji dan tongsha ni to tuzi dhan ruguris, marbe.
So in this section where we see the refuge, we'll see that we can also include the beginning of an explanation on the four opponent powers, because the power of the basis refers to the refuge, and the other three opponent powers are the power of regret, the power of commitment, and the power of antidote. So those are the four opponent powers, and we can speak of these four opponent powers relative to acknowledgement of downfalls or confession in this section on refuge because of the power of basis that is already being explained.
What that never does the Mandamaris, never does the Mandavaji, Dibi Sabin the Shindomaris, never does Mege, and the Dibi Sabin Sine, and the could Dungaji, nobody known what is Marba.
The four opponent powers are very similar to fire. In the same way that fire has the ability to burn away a tree and completely eradicate it, the power of the four opponent powers has the ability to eradicate the seeds or the predispositions within our mental continuum that will produce suffering. And when those are eradicated, the suffering will not have to be experienced. So the four opponent powers act as a purification device in the same way that fire burns away wood. The four opponent powers, fire, burns away the seed's potential to produce suffering.
Oji ta dibale what the Shadang Jeduga Jusen Karasan, Debi in Rebel Dungan Wars, and also Sijan Sundi in a Dungan Dogumatis, Dungan Mandoba Inza, and Dungan Jud members and Tashi Wars, Dungan Jud Kane members of Warasana, that never touches Tang Yugan Shadang Jadis, that is Marba.
So what is the reason for this confession of downfalls or for this acknowledgement of downfalls? The reason for this is because we know that suffering is an effect, and all effects are dependent upon their causes, and we know that misdeeds and so forth are the causal factors for suffering. And by utilizing the acknowledgement of downfalls or confession, we have the ability to purify these negativities so that we do not have to experience these ripening results. So this is the reason for confession or acknowledgement of downfalls. It's in order to purify the causal factors for suffering.
Oji Tang Association Sundi the one dogres, the one dogres, the one dogo is not the Judu, the Ju, and the Gawa. Gawat the Kazidruba Yina and Senta the Shema, Mambulan, the Wayuma things that is.
As all sentient beings wish to have happiness just like we do, we have to find out how to produce that happiness because it is a fruit. So it's necessary for us to examine what the causal factors are for that fruition.
What that the song also then may the children between Tang, Gajan not the waters, Marba, Gajan not and then Gajan Mahumba Jet not the waters. Nyawa Lijiva in to church to Mare, and also Nyawa Jim was that's in Yawachawa. To know Lijiv, Nason Jivaina, and also do Yabu to Mares, and Nason Jim was Marba.
So here, at this moment, we have this human basis, which is very important. This human basis we have obtained, but it is very difficult to have and easily lost. We see that at this moment, we haven't been born into the hell realms. We haven't been born into the hungry ghosts. We haven't been born as an animal. We haven't been born into any of the lower realms. So right now, we have this excellent quality of a human basis.
다 유타고도 저 라루죠 유타고도 최면서 로마 타다발 제바이나 안는 아주 주도도 뭐 어떤 제만 아주 최여설 제요 그래서 말이야.
So one hasn't been born in a remote region or near in a barbaric land, so hasn't been born into a place where there is no Dharma present. So we are not in that position at this moment.
라루죠 유유스 제바이나等최케면에 로다 안네 라루제는 제바이나 최제도요 말이야. 어떤 아주 레디오 말이야.
So the barbarians are those who are confused and imbued with wrong views. Their mind is full of wrong views, and there's no one who is pronouncing the truth. There is no one who is pronouncing the truth of the Dharma at that time. And we at this point are not born in a place like this.
사처림을 제여바이나 아주 제제도 말이야. 사처부 처림부터 동부야 제도 할지 송원냐 바지. 근데 시가바도 니게 된다 말이야. 그 same
we haven't been born as a long life God. If we were born as a long life God, we would experience for a moment the identity of ourselves as a long life God, and then we would go into a state that was very similar to sleeping for a long period of time, and we would not produce any positive results, and we haven't been born into this position either.
저는 오버만 상황이에요. 나는 아주 최제도 뭐 오버만 상황 안주 먹고 괜다. 어떤 게 미매받 안주 먹고 괜다를 집에 있는 아주 최제도 뭐 되는 아주 레모도스.
we haven't been born with faulty factors. It's a literal translation. So faulty factors refers to the mental hearing and the seeing and the smelling, touching, tasting, all these various things that we can experience. Being deaf, we haven't been born deaf. We haven't been born blind. We haven't been born with this faulty mind. So we have the ability, because of these powers we possess, to understand this scripture.
안에 따와 로반제바 따와 로바 안에 추당 게데게 따와 던데 케네게 되네 아주 제제도 말 던데 가서 레디오 말레스
Natsu Dawalopa me Jenda Dawalopa.
나수 단다 따와 로바 레디오 말레스
So at this point we haven't been born with wrong views, extreme heinous views which are incorrect, which others have a potential to hold, and at this moment we don't have these extreme wrong views.
어데 먹고비 제들 제바 이나 추로얄 콩고 말레스 안에 가서 먹고비 제단 대와레스 추루비 게젠단 대와레스 게젠단 대바 이나 퇴제 마사나 안 죄제도 만 퇴제가 상도여레스 안에 랑은 상고야 퇴제 나 젠은 상고야 나죠 just
So we haven't been, there are these 8 negativities that would inhibit our ability to engage in practice, and we haven't been born with any of these 8 negativities. And then if we look at another way, we can say that there are 5 outer qualities and 5 inner qualities that we possess at this moment, or don't possess at this moment, rather. So this can be explained it can be explained in this fashion as well.
당은 수중은 상고야 나도 가르서나 매니 유지 어부창 레타말로 내라데스 매니스 안에 가서 머레도스 머레디오르스 매니 유유스 저와 최다설 제여서 유유스 저와 매인바 유유스 저와
요 데도네가레
유유스 저 최여서 사절 저와 매니 유지 어부창 때는 안주용 받던 데레디오 말로 어부창 매니 유지 어부창 레타말롱 참에게 레마지 받는 말베 파마세발로수바 참에게 레마지바 레타말롱 내라 대세 사지기 술 대바요바 가부요바 어떤가 창도 가서 나들 매니바 유유스 저와 어부창와 레타말롱 내라 대바스 나 창도 가서
Mayimba, memambo de nyaman chegadu, chu nyalan chegadu, chu nyalan cheken yore.
유유스죠. 추여설 제요르스.
The chu triken yore.
추여설 사절 제요르스. 추면서 사절 제소나 추여 말어. 추여설 사절 제요르스.
Okay, chu sacha. Chu chena, then a wambo akdikson. So the 5 qualities, the nala 강인 세나 the nga etanga
장강나대로.
Trankanga.
1 2 3 4 5.
Yine tranka ju yore. Nala jen.
jen 창고 나더.
De jen.
근데 랑.
Wrong. Then sacha jen yimba.
매니스나 수수 매레도.
Lesso.
매임바.
Lesso.
유유스 저와 어부창데 미드.
Lesso.
What does it?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was completely clear, because these are the 5 inner qualities that we're going to speak of. The first is that we were born as a human. So we have this human basis. We haven't been born as another. We were born in a place where there is Dharma flourishing. They were born in a place where the Dharma is prospering. We weren't born with faulty sources or faulty powers. So we weren't born deaf or with any of these impediments. We don't have any kind of immutable karma or any kind of heinous karma that can't be reversed, or irreversible karma. And we don't, there are those with compassion, I believe is the literal translation. So there are those who support the Dharma present. There are the benefactors and so forth. So we are in a place of these 5 conditions.
어제 다들 젠원 창고야 뒤진가드 가르스나 사제 쉬는 당스 사제 지된 두셔마스 샤자문 보다는 자갈 페네 최송 원단다 선지 샤자부 도바도 요 말에 이나야 샤자 도비 니 최도 송행 그게한테 요아르스 사제 쉬는 당 최도스 니제 템바네다 사제기 티체도 요아르스 매바차 말스 템바네다
Lesso.
대제 조스 아니 사제기 템발레 안에 가부지는 어떨래 로정지가 뭔부 요아르스 대바 내다 대제주 현실 힘을 써 현실 힘을 써 안에 사지 취지가 좀 가부지는 로부지가 된다 요아르스 말봐
Then ngama gare.
아
This is the ngapa gare. Nangla ngapa.
레타만로 내라 데로 내 사지기 취라 대바요 봐
Tepa yoba.
Tepa.
Ale tepa yoba. Then the ngama the ngapa tepa yoba. The gender you're in.
힘을 써 취지가 좀 로부지가 브랜드 have man yeah.
So just a correction on the fifth quality and the inner quality. Rinpoche said the literal is there are those with faith. That's why I was confused before. So there are those with faith, faith in the Dharma. So the 5 outer qualities are that Buddha has arrived in the world system. So we're in a world system. Shakyamuni, 2,500 years ago, came and taught the Dharma. So a Buddha has arrived during our time. The second is there are teachers teaching the Dharma that the Buddha has taught presently. So that is the second. The third is that the teaching exists in the world. So not only did the Buddha arrive and the teachers teach, but the teaching actually exists in the world, the real teaching. And then there are practitioners of the actual teaching, so people who are practicing the teaching. And lastly, there are those with compassion. So that's those benefactors and so forth who support the Dharma. So that's the fifth one.
때문에 어때 당아도 추르비 뒤제가 상 계신다 제도와르스 어 된다게 뒤설은 아주 추 도스로기나 안에시라고 뇌바치고르스
So we have been removed from these, and we currently possess the 8 leisures and the 10 endowments.
어제 다 가서 된만 동샤 된만 그래서 동샤 트리바이보다 샤자 투비 송바레스 샤자 투바 트리바이보다 소드라 되는 사지 샤자 투바 송레스 말바
So this sutra, we will now get into the 35 Buddhas of Confession, and this is a sutra that was pronounced by the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni Buddha himself.
어제 다다네 가서 녀부 또지 성유군의 샤나지기나 안에 마다비 디바요 말이 사지가 송바레스 로와 추이제다 되나 참마방아 예신 암마마고스 녀부 또지 상소나 안 디바치부 간데지네 안에 다투레스 사지가 송바레스 어디 녀부 군도 쉬비 또 나올래 안에 다녀부 또지 성유군의 샤나지기나 추이제 상와레스 녀부 또지데 안에 당아주 동샤제지나 땡지도 동불 용도 왔어 땡지도들 정도던 생제 공부스 어디 라리 점도 손을 땡지도 정도던 생제 공부들 자유로 왔어 말이야.
So when we speak of this actual sutra, and we speak of it relative to a confession of downfalls and the 4 opponent powers, we see in the beginning section that the power of basis is exemplified. So in the Lamrim Chemo, or the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, Lama Tsongkhapa included the power of basis and stated that the power of basis was refuge and the mind that aspires to enlightenment. So refuge and the mind that aspires to enlightenment are the power of basis, and that is explained initially in the commentary on the 35 Buddhas. And the Buddha has stated that there is no karma that cannot be purified. Even the 5 heinous crimes can be purified. So there is nothing that these 4 opponent powers cannot serve as an antidote to.
와 다녀부터 저 돈이 고객이네 디바다 그래서 상주 생고나 디바다 그래서 아니 예자던 디바다는 그래서 어들은 몸무송요 그래서 말이야.
It's also stated that there are many ways to purify karma. One can meditate upon emptiness, what the Tomba Nigom Dang,
아니 예자
the 100 syllable mantra, and so forth. So one can engage in various activities to purify.
전에 사제기 생하다 주디지기 이나 생하도 전 디바다 그래서
So any of the deities' name mantras, Buddha's name mantra, can be recited, and this will serve as purification as well.
공바사바 주바다
If one builds a new,
고송토대지 어두스 디바다 그래서
so if one builds a new monastery or temple or engages in those activities, this will serve as purification as well.
어제 다때는 가서 그래 동샤되기 있는 디바다 그래서 그래서 말이야.
So by reciting the 30 Tongchag, the confession of downfalls, one can purify as well.
어제 다디 동샤들 데바드네 보다 자나서야지 어떤 법이 개발지 되셔스 보다 자나서도 보다 상지로 자나이시 상지이시 피시 배신 라마 피시 맨로서 말 상지이시.
So the commentary on this Confession of Downfalls was written by someone who was called the Buddha Wisdom. That's the translation of his name, who wrote the commentary, Sanjay Yeshe. So this was maybe perhaps one of the Panchen Lamas, possibly. But it's not clear whether it is or not, but it's possible. So the pandit called Buddha Wisdom is the author's name is in this particular commentary, but it's not clear if it might just be the Panchen Lama. But the person who wrote this commentary is going to be called Buddha Wisdom. So there are 3 sections to the 35 Buddhas of Confession of Downfalls. So the first section, the Tambo Chik Ni that's not. So the first is the Confession of Misdeeds, or Acknowledgement of Misdeeds section. So this is I just asked, I said, I'm a little sick, please slow down and let's do them one by one. So the Confession of Misdeeds section is the first section. So if one acknowledges their downfalls, then one produces virtue. So the next is the producing virtue and the dedication. So this is the second section. So the third is the abbreviated meaning of the entire text. So the abbreviated meaning of the Confession of Downfalls.
Oh that number then deba shabi tunes deba shadan shabi tu kanda shawo deba kanda shawo deba kanda meba zugures dongen jo deba de meba kanda zugures na chege do an jerme chege lari duden non haba ledi jo ne cheyu junto toje sawa temba jes an jerme je lari duden gozo ne ngazo dongen mendo ba yinza an ledi jawa deba shadan je shirage kechures import 개체버려. 대인 소자 안에 뒤 준도 내부 도지 냐래지야 개체버려. 손도와스 말베.
So it's been stated that it's necessary to practice these 4 opponent powers to eradicate the causal factors for suffering. It has been stated by Lama Tsongkhapa in the abbreviated stages of the path to enlightenment that one must know what the cause of the suffering is in order to know what to eradicate. So it's necessary to know what the causal factors of suffering are in order to know what to abandon. So we must first, in the initial part of this commentary, it explains suffering and misdeeds and what misdeeds exactly are. So what the nature of misdeeds are and what the meaning of misdeeds is, or the meaning of non-virtuous activities. What is the meaning of non-virtuous activities?
다 디바샤비 추들 사제제 뒤중 같이 사모로서부터 추주 고도요레스 디바샤비 추들 지레스 땡지 도지군 디바샤비 추 땡지 도지군 디바샤비 추 동부도 말베 전도도 senji 공부 들어와 땡지 도지군 디바샤비 추 되는 예부 군두셔비 도지군 디바샤비 추 엔트도 말베 어제 다 안에 송바데 안에 나바 선진비 도지군 디바샤비 추 냐발 하두비 도지군 디바샤비 추 지드레스 냐부 도지 사제 지드레스 말베.
So we've gone over these 4 opponent powers so many times: the power of basis, the power of antidote, the power of commitment, and the power of I'm sorry. We've gone. Let me try this again. We've gone over these 4 opponent powers so many times, so we've gone over them in this way. Gone over them, explaining them as the beginning being the power of basis, then the power of antidote, then the power of regret, and the power of commitment. So they can be explained in various different ways, and we've explained them many times.
어제 다 담보 가서 라렌도 술 땡지도 쇼를 해거든. 동샤게 땡지도 동공고 해요. 그래서 말이야. 땡지도데 담보레스 땡지도 담보레스. 땡지도 전루도 세제니들 땡지도서 그래서 말이야. 전루도 세제. 전루도 바지 다 남비 고 말이야. 남비 그라운드 말이야. 전루도 야부 종소나 남비 그라운드 종버레스. 안 남비 주야부 종버레스. 세제도 야부 종나 마야나 그라운드.
So there are many different ways and different orders for these four opponent powers. In this particular Lam Rim, in the commentaries, at the beginning we see that the first is the power of basis. Sometimes it's listed in different order, but the first is power of basis. So the power of basis refers to refuge and bodhichitta. Refuge being the ground or the basis for all of Buddhism, and bodhicitta being the ground or the basis for the great vehicle or the Mahayana. So here, the power of basis are these two things. These two things are the power of basis.
어제 다다네 대주고는 디바샤비 초들래 나가서 동샤 나올 남은 상주선비 동화샤바스 왜 말이야.
Namo Shanchu Samba Tuwa Shabada Sheju Tuda Tula Mala Jazu Chu
동샤도 가시도 자주도 어디.
Tuma.
어디 남은 상주선비 동화샤바스 베이돌 때도 와서 남은서야도 샤차월로 샤차와. 남은서는 샤차와서 그래서 상주선비 동화샤바스 안데 상주선바 부드사바로. 부드사바를 자유 동화 죄지던 예시로라 소바 고솔 동바모 보여. 그래서 차소나 안데 고조 동샤는 디바트 하고 그래서 남은 상주선비 동화샤바스. 안데 상주선바 속에 안데 그룹도 상주선비 동바던 게네 동샤는 동샤 두고 요나 안는 가서 동샤는 가서 디바샤 두고 요나 어디 동샤는 디바다 그래서 어디 인사를
So in the Tibetan text, we'll see it begins with Namo Shanchu Semba Tongwa Shaba Da Ming Da Shejiwa. Okay, so the Ming is your name. So it begins with Namo means refuge. So
Namo 샤차만 여러분이 와 근데 그
Namo Guru Be
Namo 샤차와
so the Namo Rinpoche is saying refers to homage in this particular sense. And it also can be refuge. He said that is fine as well, but Rinpoche said homage or prostration. So it's saying I prostrate. I don't have the act. Can somebody give me one of the texts so I'm following the same thing? I don't know. There was one on here before, and it's not here anymore. So I was counting on it.
이제 찔러는 이거.
So homage to the confession of the Bodhisattva's downfalls. Okay, so here the Bodhisattva takes 18 root and 46 secondary vows. So if a Bodhisattva is to break any of his or her vows, then he or she must engage in a confession. So this is why it says homage to the confession of the Bodhisattva's downfalls, because the Bodhisattva's downfalls refers to any infraction of the 18 root or 46 secondary vows, and this is a purification for a Bodhisattva to practice. So here, this is paying homage to this actual text.
어제 다 디바 디동샤비 주스 디동스니 레고도 디바도 동화스 디바 동화스니 레고레스 답은 가서 디바 먹어 줘대 잡아게 어디 잡아도 안하게 제바 이내 디바레스 말바 침바게 전에 디바 인사 라지지 가는 만도 왔어 그 침바도 라준이 잘 디바 요들어 왔다 말이야 다드네 잡아도 도술 창통 주 말이야 줘로 창 어디 산지가 로 팅스 팅 말이야 창통은 팅던 게 온거로 동화스 그래서 동화 근데 잡아도 안술 대근에도 도술 동화 팅요 들어와 등 계속나 동화로 그래서 동화스는 가르스나 그게 내부던 게 손으로 동화
근데 the genye changma tong you
genye 창토주 통주고 말아봐다 당소나 genye가 도방 게로 들 동화로 그래서 동화스는 가봐 동거서 내 손으로 그래서 샤나 맞이나 내 손 동거래서 어디로
So when we speak of negativities, there are various bases for negativities because there are those who hold fully ordained nuns' vows, fully ordained monks' vows, those who hold householders' vows. And for instance, those things that are in common with all of those parties is that abandonment of the 10 non-virtues and engagement in the 10 virtuous activities is necessary. So in common, we see with all beings that it's necessary to abandon the 10 non-virtues. And, but for instance, it is stated that an ordained person should not use alcoholic beverages or drink alcohol, whereas it isn't stated in those 10 non-virtues. So the basis of the vows is it's important to speak of when we're speaking of what needs to be purified, because certain beings hold other vows, different vows than others. And when we, what kind of things need to be purified? Those things which propel one downward. And the meaning of propel one downward is that it will throw one into the lowest realms. So that's the meaning. So it's in a confession of downfalls, the kind of downfalls which will propel one into the lower realms. And those downfalls are different depending on the person who is engaging in action.
어제 다 대바던 동안줄 샤나지긴 다 그래서 샤나지도 땡지고네 샤나지긴 샤주 정도당 생제고기나 대바다 그래서 땡지도 소대서 말이야.
So when we look at the purification and the removal or removing ourselves from a downfall, it's more literal. If we look at removal of ourselves from a downfall and we look at the method in which to do so, we see that the first is of the 4 opponent powers is the power of basis, refuge, and the mind that aspires to enlightenment.
다 소소게 디바도 야산단 다 메디시제와스 다 메디시제와 안에 내 디발 가범에 가서는 디비 레벨 동에 용거래 내 디바샤기 다 메디시제와 안에 뒤따도 내 산제를 줘준도기 줄을 줘준도기 근딜을 줘준도기 줘주셔야도 어디 땡지도 되는 말이야.
So here it says I throughout all times. I don't think that the Lamala Jasuchu Buikimba.
Be인을 뒤따도
Lamala Jasuchu here.
베이게 되는 가지고는 하단 레드도 안에 라마데게 자와치고 찌네는 라마를 줘주셔서 너무 잘한 거였어.
So here it states, I say your name throughout all times, take refuge in the Guru. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So here it's saying I, so I, whoever your name is, you put your name into there, have throughout all times engaged in various negativities. Here I go for refuge to the Guru, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And first, Rinpoche didn't say Lama Japsuchio. So, and in the Tibetan text and the English, it says to the teacher. And Rinpoche said in a tantric context with Guru devotion, it's necessary to pay homage to the teacher. So that's the reason for the injection of the teacher into the text, because if one is looking at it from a tantric perspective, it's necessary to go for refuge to the teacher in Guru devotion. Guru devotion.
다 산제라 줘서 줄라 줘서 근데라 줘 산제스 간데 줘와 산제 멤버 나버스 아니 녀모바다 시 제바 산제 본신 바스 본신비네 와데 샤자문 보달라서 버도 걸로 산제레스 마르베 멤버 나버스 마르베.
So first, we'll see, I take refuge in the Sangha. It's not first in the book, but in the Tibetan it is. I take refuge, I'm sorry, see, I'm not doing well today. I take refuge in the Buddha. So the Buddha should be looked at as a doctor. And why should the Buddha be looked at as a doctor? The Buddha has already eradicated all of the afflictive obstructions and the obstructions to omniscience and has achieved the all-knowing mind. He has abandoned all faults and achieved all good qualities. And so he is an appropriate basis to go for refuge to, because he was previously the same and was able to transcend all of his negativities. The same as us, and was able to transcend all of his negativities.
산제라 줘서 줄라 줘서 줄다 안에 해단다와 안에 줄 건중원에던 고대단라데니들스 고대단라데니데 안에 줄 건중원에들 줄라 줘서 시스 말이야.
So the next is I take refuge in the Dharma. And what is the real refuge? What is the ultimate dharmic refuge? That is the the path and cessation, the truth of path and truth of cessation. So this is the real, actual, ultimate Dharma refuge, and it should be looked at as the medicine.
어초라 저스 다 근들라 저 상가들이 파바스레스 추군주 줄라 예비 안 간자 니트 파바 라제 파바 상생 파바 상지 파바도 근들군주스레스.
So the next is I take refuge in the Sangha. And the Sangha truly refers to those Arya beings, the superior beings, those superiors on the path of the superior hearers, the superior solitary realizers, the superior bodhisattvas, and the superior Buddhas. So any of these superiors fall into the category of the Sangha jewel.
어제 다드네 정도들 다 준이 상고르스 준이 상수는 정도도 야부용거래 준이 마상 정도 호마레스 다 준이 가상고서는 가서 제가 나치 동에다 안에 동에지 동에 주유 동에 차반 두시게 동에 어떤 산다바이나 안는 가서 생일시나 레그레스 또 주지레스 말이야 시나들 해용도 들레 잡이 뇌바데 건조선을 예체데 안 송소나 안는 건조선보랑 체냐비 정도 야부용거레스.
So it's in order to produce refuge, one has to produce the causal factors for refuge. Because refuge is an effect, it is dependent upon causes. There are two causal factors for refuge, fear and faith. Excuse me. The first is a fear. And what would one be afraid of? It is a recognition of all the different sufferings within the realms. It's a recognition of the suffering of change, the suffering of suffering, the pervasive compounded suffering, the suffering of being separated from pleasure and a meeting with the unpleasant. So one has to endure all of these various types of suffering. So if a fear arises upon recognition of all these types of suffering, and then one has then the first causal factor for refuge has been produced. And then if one finds a basis of faith and recognizes that there are beings who have qualities higher than one's own, then the second causal factor of faith is produced. So if one recognizes that these three jewels have higher qualities and have the ability to eradicate this fear, then the second causal factor has been produced. So fear and faith are both necessary to produce refuge.
당아도 정도 준이 참고는 사지 건조랑기 체냐베 아니 정도 제바이나 아니 사지 가서 동el 저 투르스 저 네바요아르스 콘타지 챵바레 녀모바데 시지 리바가 뽕센바레스 아니 센제 타지를 샹바다 힌지요아르스 동el 저 네바요아르스 네바요다 아는 가서 사지 건조도 같은 건조송을 쪄선 로기나 쪄 뉴거레스 말바. So
why is the Buddha an appropriate basis for refuge? The Buddha is an appropriate basis for refuge because he or she has all of the omniscient qualities that one can possess. He has eradicated all of the afflictive obstructions. He has eradicated the obstructions to omniscience, achieved the omniscient mind, and has love and compassion that is without prejudice for all sentient beings. And it's because of this, because of Buddha having the ability, because he has transcended his negativities, and because he has love and compassion for all beings, that he or she is an appropriate basis for our refuge.
어제 분당가서 보고 주신 그 시용들들네 그 주지 상도 왔어. 아니 그 천달해서나 시용도 안될 잡이 내봐도 파마를 해봐 예시는 파마를 줘서도 왔어. 파마 보고를 샴바요 니지요래 치인지 벌죠 두고도 된다고 인사를.
We can see an example of a dog and a small child. If a small child is scared by a dog and then runs to his or her parents for refuge, then two causal factors in a similar way have been created. The child has fear in the animal and then has faith that his or her parents will save him or her. And this is very similar to the way we go for refuge to the three jewels.
어제 다 건조송을 쪄서 로아 장제 되네 쪄녀야 갈리 커버스. 다달 쪄서 로아 장제네 나사 타가무도 다달 쪄서는 다달 때샤 멘스가이나 나사 타노도 왔어. 더나지 산지가 송샤비 산지라 건조송을 쪄서 루요고네 산지가 송비 매단다이 최드냐네 집고네 아니 내 송고 동에 가야 아니 그 동에 가야 레다 녀모 가야 어떤 이자마르베.
So if one just goes for refuge to the Buddha, this will not produce the results the same way that if one goes to a doctor and just goes for refuge to the doctor but doesn't take the medicine that has been prescribed, then it will not be beneficial. So it's necessary for the practitioner to not only go for refuge, but to practice the Dharma that has been pronounced by the Buddha. And it's only through practicing this Dharma that one can eradicate or abandon the cyclical suffering.
사실은 저는 사제게 되네 먹이 주봉 추진의 대발 샤나야 버제게나 던론도 그래서 아니 샤주가 생야부 공게나 안 대바 제물도 그래서 어떤 사제게 된 샤비 매단다 주드냐네 제고 그래서
So if one can have an abandonment of the 10 non-virtues and engage in the 10 virtuous activities, then one can Mgiwa Jupon then dendro la dro
던론도 그래서
then
되네 라바소냐네 아버제게 타발도 그래서
So if one abandons the 10 non-virtues and engages in the 10 virtuous activities, then one can be born into the higher realms. If one engages in a practice of the 3 higher trainings, then one can create liberation or achieve liberation. If one engages in a practice of the mind that aspires to enlightenment, then one can achieve the state of Buddhahood.
What the John de la Dani Gowares? Ju John de Rebi John Ni Yoris. You just the Jos. Ju Josan also, Ju Josan Shajaman Buddha, the Josan wrote the Ju John, Ju John. The Suk Jushebala Tene and Jemangazu Saji Tugro. And Jemangazu Saji Gomutua Shao, Jemangazu Saji Yungro. The Saji Dreburis and Debi Job.
Ale Sanjay Jantru Depi Jantru.
Three Jo the Latin Ju cause 3 Jo.
So there are 2 types of refuge. There is causal refuge and resultant refuge. Causal refuge is the refuge that we go for instance, to Shakyamuni Buddha, so that in the future we can actually meet with these beings. The resultant refuge is the actual refuge that we take in the Buddha that we become. So the resultant refuge is the actual, our enlightenment, the refuge in our Buddhahood. So when we say, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, that is the resultant refuge that we're speaking of, the Buddhahood that we're wishing to achieve through the refuge. So in the thought to wish to bring all sentient beings to a state of complete Buddhahood, because the
bodhichitta
then Shanchu the Shanchu Sembi Depu.
Lamala Jos, Hajila Chula Jos, Gadila Jos Cho. Dag is Sijan Taji, Haju Tuba Shao, Tuba Chuchi, Saulote, Shanchu Senda Mother, Debi Jondus.
So when one states that I wish to bring all sentient beings to a state of complete enlightenment, and then this is the mind that aspires to enlightenment. This is bodhichitta, and then this will produce the resultant refuge, which is the actual Buddhahood.
What the Dasija Taji to Sanju Tuba Chuchi and Debi Jondo Marve, Debi Jondo. What the bodhichitta the Dangris, the bodhichitta the Sondu Waters. Ju Jondo goes to Dene, Debi Jondo de.
So, because there are 2 kinds of refuge, even though it isn't explicitly stated, bodhicitta is explained in here because of causal refuge and resultant refuge, and the resultant refuge becoming a Buddha in order to free all sentient beings from suffering. So it is inferred that bodhicitta is included in this section because of the 2 divisions of refuge and the goal or aim of that refuge.
I take a in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. Sejan Taji to Sanju Tuba Sha, tobar chuji rebi jawnu marbe. What the bodhichitta was.
So it is very similar to the mind that aspires to enlightenment when we state, I take refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha, may I become a Buddha in order to free all sentient beings.
What the senior Taji done the Sanju Kubu Tuba Shawonya Sanlu the Jawnu marbe, Shanju Sen, Shanju Senroa. Shanju Sen the Dreba Yita, Kolo Jogu was. Jokandas a Jundi Manga Duju kun Sanji with Sudan. Dajanya Baji kun Sanji.
So in order, when we speak of the resultant refuge is the actual achievement of enlightenment in order to free all sentient beings. And this is the mind that aspires to enlightenment, the desire to become a Buddha, to free all sentient beings from suffering. So because bodhicitta is an effect, it's necessary to explain its causes. So there are two causal lineages for achieving the state of the mind that aspires to enlightenment. The 7-point cause and effect for achieving the mind that aspires to enlightenment, and equalizing and exchanging self with others.
And the Canagos and Saint Masheba, Tintemba, Tinzoa, Yonki Shamba, Nije, Hasala Tene, and the Shanju Saint Jules.
So the 7-point cause and effect has 6 causal factors and 1 effect, the effect being the actual mind that aspires to enlightenment, or the bodhicitta. The first is recognizing that all sentient beings have been our mothers. The second is remembering their kindness. The third is wishing to repay their kindness. The fourth is love through the force of attraction. The fifth is great compassion. And the sixth is the extraordinary attitude. So these 6 causal factors produce the mind that aspires to enlightenment. So the second lineage, which is called the equalizing and exchanging self with others lineage, it refers to the abandonment of the self-cherishing attitude and the recognition of the negativities of the self-cherishing attitude. And this is how one achieves the mind that aspires to enlightenment in order to become a Buddha through the equalizing and exchanging self with others practice.
What Tenji done Jandu than Senji Gumba Sonyorwa, what the Jandu was 7 was, Senji the day Nyandu Leoris, Debal what Tishas, Senji Nyandu Lea de, Jandu de la, Ju Jandu than Devi Jandu Nirova, Devi Jandu Tune, Senji Vigi was.
Wow. So the beginning of this text explains the power of basis. Even though explicitly bodhicitta is not mentioned, we know that it is because refuge is causal and resultant. And because of the causal and resultant refuge, the resultant refuge must be achieved through the mind that aspires to enlightenment. So it's necessary to include that in this, and then that is how we can explain this through the 4 opponent powers, beginning with the power of basis.
당가서 하우스 대바이나 산제라 조수 출라 조수 근딜라 조수 해야 되게 정도 마도 매반다 봐 맞아 정도 마도 매반다 봐도스 이나 대냥도 산주 생레디오 와르스 까마틀 the teachers.
So when we say I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in the Sangha, we would just look at that and see, oh, there's some sort of refuge. But if we read a commentary and get clarification, we will find that bodhicitta is also included within there.
다때 상주 생의 간대용 거서 정도들 주의 정도든 리비 정도 니와 리비 정도를 산다바이나 아니 상주 생거든 저도.
So how can we say that the mind that aspires to enlightenment is explained? It is explained in the resultant refuge because there is both causal and resultant refuge.
안데 사제의 손도 시다가 뇌바치고 인사です. 안데 사제를 먼저 동사지게 저 먼저 동사지 당바이나 and the Sanji land the Ciji Matumaris, Ciji the Drawmanda, Tonji Ganga land in the Gris. Sonji need to join and Tomani to Susukos, Sonji sent Son to Shida Nevacho, Georgia Jachu.
So it has been stated that if the Buddha is asked a question by 1,000 different people, he only needs to utter one word and it will answer all of their questions. So it has been stated this, and this is why the Buddha's speech is so special. because of this ability to be understood in all languages by utterance of one word. And there's a quote that says, the Buddha can be understood in all tongues by uttering a syllable.
달 마당 하당 안니 지게 신전 담만다게 더 마바당 요나 안나 상지게 치데 치지게 하당 마다 타지 렌텐 거서 하족을 하이게 둘고는 거서 무슨 메이게 둘고는 거서 신전에다 그런 게 둘고는 거서.
So if there were all different kinds of sentient beings, there were humans and gods and so forth, and they were all asking questions, then one word would answer all of them by the Buddha, and they would understand it in their own language.
어떤이 있어서 단득이 라마 상제라 줘서 출라 줘서 근들라 줘서 해야 되게 안에 상주게 센다 저르니 자된 소군도스 야.
So here we can see where it says, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha, where we see there are both refuge and bodhichitta included. Both refuge and bodhichitta are included. I'm not allowed to say where, but I was food poisoned.
Tibetan language
So in the beginning, when I was in Tibet and I was a small child, this is the first thing that my teacher went over with me. And there were three of us, myself and two brothers. One brother was older than me, and one brother was younger than I. So we didn't have any more than one book. We only had one text of this Confession of Downfalls. So, and I didn't understand Tibetan language at all, so my teacher sat us down and he would go over this text syllable by syllable. So he would say na, ma, naro, mo, namo. And that's the way, anyone who doesn't know, that's the way Tibetan language is written out. There's syllables and then things on top of letters, and it's Tibetan language stuff, but na, ma, naro, mo, namo is how you begin to learn to read Tibetan language. So we used to have to go up into the fields and do work, and we had this wooden box that we would carry our text in. So we would go up into the fields and give the animals their food and everything, and then we would look at the texts. And then every day our teacher would test us on the text. Maybe only 3 or 4 words, 1 or 2 words initially. Then more and more and more. My older brother has very good intelligence. My younger brother was quite stupid. He wasn't able to answer much. Talk much, answer much. But myself and my older brother always practiced or studied. So in the morning, I would carry it up. So we used to, that's how I remembered it. So we used to, I have to be careful because I know all these stories, so I have to be careful. So we would have to bring this text up and down the mountain when we would go look after the animals. And I would say, I'm going to carry it. And then he would say, I'm going to carry it. And then we would end up getting into a fight about it. And then we got into such a fight that we broke the box. But we came to the teacher, and teacher didn't get mad at us. He just said, listen, in the morning you carry it, and in the night you carry it. And this calmed the whole situation. I really like my teacher.
근데 총아콜 준네 버자 준라 두고 말았다. 이게 칼라 그랬다. 칼라. 드마다도가 칼라 그랬어.
Geche Yomare.
버자 두고 말다 콜.
So, and then other things that our teacher would just recite to us verbally, and we would learn it in that fashion, that we wouldn't use a text.
최종 거다가 선고 주고 말았어. 디상산 당도 대 동샤데 뭐 비장 들어봐. 디바 되든 다 되죠보다.
When we're small, we don't really know what we're doing or why we're doing it. But now I look at it and I realize that I purified so many misdeeds, and it's a great thing.
어떤에 개 그런 냐마를 동샤 사르는데 그래서 사르는데 그렇고. 안에 개 건데 다 대아버요 무슨 가수인데 그랬어.
So my teacher went over this in its entirety with me, and wouldn't it be good for us to do the same thing, the same way that we did previously? These days, I rejoice in the fact that my teacher has explained this to me. This explanation of the Confession of Downfalls is very important. Just thinking about it, you're thinking about in an abbreviated fashion, you're purifying misdeeds. So then we would, when we were smaller, we would study it and then memorize it and analyze it and then understand it more.
Got it. So, and I would recite this Confession of Downfalls 3 times a day, twice in the morning and once at night. So
that is the refuge section. So here, the next is to the founder, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfected, completed Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, I prostrate. So here, this is a reference to paying homage to our teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, and it is said that one can purify 10,000 negative eons of karma by reciting this chi-chi, kalpa chi-chi. 10,000 eons of negative karma. So the power of basis is shown here when we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in the Sangha. So we've already gone over the power of basis and seen how it was in the very first section of this text.
The
Nipa Gundish. Okay, so the second section is the power of antidote in this listing. So Nipa Gundashupi dope, power of antidote is the second opponent power. Ngay Tsampa Jupu Yabiomare. Ngay Tsampa the Jupu Kap. Triwadan Lenja.
Okay. Tari jeb the zubudum mudus marbe. Today jeb leto hurt.
Today, Rinpoche said I'm a little sick, so we're going to cut it short and have, I've slept like 5 minutes, so throwing up and all the good things that happen when you have food poisoning. So if we want to do question and answers, if people have questions, we want to make sure we address those types of things, and then we'll do dedications and so forth, and whatever people would like to do. So why don't we do the prayers and so forth first, and then we can go forward with questions and answers if people wish to do so. And if I run out of the room, pray louder. The fundamental ground of Zashim Yin Yushim Endo Dram Ri Ra Lin Yin Ne
Sanje Shindu Mine Uanji Drongun Anda Jilan Yumbajo Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niratayami. Jambe Bawu Jita Chen Padang Guntu Zambo Deyan Dejin Deda Kunji Jesu Dalu Jia Gewa Deda Tanche Ratungo Duzum Jebe Jawa Tanche Ji Ngowa Gala Chotu Ngabade Dajen Gewe Tsawa De Kunjang Sambo Chichira Tu Ngowadi Amri Rawing Morwe Shinyam Ni Bendan Dewa Malun Jongwe Ne Chenrezig Yadoi Jambezide Manun Yoji Lozun Zambo Junjen Nang Allah Yun Rin Yam Pan Zebe Gewe Jin London Do Be Demba Zin Jemba Yun Sur Wana Chen Shop Den Yo Lon Ru Nye Shung Amum Patse Gambe Nguzum Donga Dan Judzin Dan Yun Zun Rudu Sam Darujin Geje Gombo Yurin Shabden Yo.
Happy Father Day.
Happy Father's Day.
Yeah.